Okay, so you can see that I have a public S3 and I hosted this S3 bucket, okay, BNMI VPC, and I have a subnet and VPC. In subnet I have a virtual machine with a private IP address. So this virtual machine doesn't have any public IP address. See, if you don't have any public IP address, we cannot connect from this virtual machine to S3 bucket. So for that we require a public IP address. We needed two prerequisite. One is a public IP address, another one is role. Okay, role. What is the role? Temporary permission, right? Okay, we can attach with the resources or AWS account. Yesterday we already discussed about that. Okay, so I already attached one role EC2 S3 full access, but the problem is my virtual machine doesn't have any public IP address. Okay, but this virtual machine need to connect this S3 as well. So for that we can use endpoint. Okay, so even if your virtual machine doesn't have any public IP address, you can connect your services S3 or systems manager, any services, okay, by using private IP address. Okay, for that we can use VPC component endpoint. So we have a two endpoint. One is gateway endpoint, another one is interface endpoint. So now we will discuss what is the gateway endpoint and what is the interface endpoint. Okay, so first just write it down. Difference between interface endpoint and gateway endpoint. So that is a very important. First, gateway endpoint. So gateway endpoint we will deploy inside a VPC. Gateway endpoint we will deploy inside a VPC or on a VPC, that you can just mention. And gateway endpoint only support S3 bucket and DynamoDB. S3 is a service and DynamoDB, so that is another service. And we can connect S3 and as well as DynamoDB by using gateway endpoint. So if you want to connect system manager or any other services, load balancer, auto scaling, so we cannot connect by using gateway endpoint, so we have to use interface endpoint for that. Okay, so one thing you have to make sure, S3 bucket, gateway endpoint we can only use for S3 and DynamoDB. That's it, only for two services. Third point, use gateway to communicate. So here we will use a gateway. Fourth point, use private IP address and route table to communicate. As the name suggests, gateway, it will use a gateway to communicate, and it will use private IP address to communicate and route table. So we have to create a route in our route table to our endpoint, then only it will work. Okay. So then fifth point, it won't use security group. We don't need to attach any security group for gateway endpoint, but when it comes to interface endpoint, we have to use a security group. So last point, can use IAM policy to restrict access. So we can integrate IAM policy as well along with our gateway endpoint. So next, interface endpoint. So we'll deploy inside a subnet. So conversely, we deploying our gateway endpoint inside a VPC. Okay, gateway endpoint we deploy inside a VPC, and interface endpoint we deploy inside a subnet. Support most of the services including S3, DynamoDB, all services. Okay, all services will support interface endpoint. And this is using ENI, Elastic Network Interface Card, instead of gateway. Gateway endpoint using gateway to communicate, and interface endpoint is using interface card, Elastic Network Interface Card. And this is using private DNS name, and this is using private IP address. So these are the difference. The gateway endpoint using private IP address, and interface endpoint using private DNS name, domain name. And this is using security group, but this gateway endpoint that is not using any security group. Last point, so can use IAM policy to restrict access. So both endpoint can use IAM policy to restrict access. We can integrate that. Done? കഴിഞ്ഞോ? ചെയ്തു. Okay. So first I will demonstrate how to create gateway endpoint. So for that I will create a VPC. Okay. Listen, I'll create a VPC. Okay, so this is my VPC. Then I will create two subnets. This is my subnet 1 and this is my subnet 2. Okay, one is public, another one is a private. This is public subnet and this is private subnet. Okay, I have a S3 bucket. S3 bucket I created outside of my VPC and this is a public S3 bucket. If you have a public AP address, then only you can connect your S3 bucket. If you don't have a public AP address, you cannot connect your S3 bucket. Okay, so first I will create a virtual machine inside my public subnet and this virtual machine will be have a public AP address and private AP address. Okay, so this VM will be have a public and private AP address. Pub private. Fine. So I'll create one more virtual machine inside my private subnet and this virtual machine only will be have a private IP address. Private IP address. See, suppose if I'm creating one role over here in this public virtual machine is S3 full access role. This virtual machine will be able to connect our S3 bucket. Why? Bucket having internet connection. See, I will show you the route. So this is my route table, this is my public route table, this is my private route table. Okay, and this public route table I associated with my subnet, same as I private route table I associated with my private subnet. I have an internet gateway over here and I connected my route table and internet gateway from my public route table, but there is no connection from my private route table, right? See, if I have a proper or sufficient permission to connect my S3 bucket, if I have a role, in the sense privilege, then I can connect from my EC2 machine to route table. From route table, this request will be go to internet gateway. From internet gateway, it will go to where? Okay, internet, then it will go to S3 bucket because my system have an internet connection, right? But in this scenario, so if I log it into my system to private virtual machine, so the connection will come to my private route table, but from private route table, I don't have any connection to internet gateway. Okay, it will stuck between that. Then what we should do? We have to create interface endpoint or gateway endpoint. Okay, so I will deploy one in gateway endpoint on my VPC. Gateway endpoint we creating on VPC and interface endpoint we creating inside our subnet. So that is the difference. Okay, I will create one endpoint on my VPC. So then I will create a route from my route table to this endpoint. Okay, and this would be S3 endpoint. And this endpoint automatically connect our S3 bucket that we have to select. Okay, so if you select S3 endpoint and this endpoint already connected to S3 bucket and we only need to create a route from private route table to our endpoint, that's it. Okay, so I'll recap once again. I will create a VPC. Inside I have a two subnets, subnet 1 and subnet 2. Subnet 1 having public IP address and private IP address virtual machine, and this virtual machine doesn't have any public IP address. So I have a public route table and private route table. Public route table have a route to internet gateway. Private route table doesn't have any route to internet gateway. See, when I'm creating any role in this virtual machine, I will add a role with this virtual machine, S3 role. Same as I will create one role my private as well. Okay, but this machine have an internet connection. That's what it can connect to route table to internet gateway to my S3 bucket. So even if this virtual machine have a role, so this virtual machine cannot connect to internet. That's what. So this will not be work. See, it will stick in between. Okay, so there is no proper route to my internet gateway, right? So what I will do here, I will create one gateway endpoint. So then I will create a route to my route table to gateway endpoint. Okay, this S3 gateway endpoint. From this endpoint, automatically it will connect to my S3 bucket. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, any doubt? Any doubt, please let me know, then I can recap once again. No problem. എങ്ങനെ ചെയ്യാം, പക്ഷേ അതിൻ്റെ ആവശ്യമില്ല. കോസ്റ്റ് എന്തിനാ വെറുതെ കൂട്ടുന്നു? ഒരു ഗേറ്റ് വെച്ചിട്ട് എന്ത് ചെയ്യാം, നമുക്ക് മൾട്ടിപ്പിൾ S3 ബക്കറ്റ് കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. ആവശ്യമില്ല, നമ്മൾ കൂടുതൽ വെക്കുന്ന പൈസ കൂടിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കും. ഒന്ന് വെച്ചിട്ട് നമുക്ക് എന്ത് ചെയ്യാം, മൾട്ടിപ്പിൾ കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. ഓക്കെ, then I'll go to my we not require internet gateway. Okay, even if your virtual machine having private IP address, The virtual machine doesn't have any public API address. The virtual machine is able to communicate with the internet. That's it. Peering connection വേണ്ട. Peering connection രണ്ട് നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് തമ്മിൽ കണക്ട് ചെയ്യാനല്ലേ? ഇത് നെറ്റ്വർക്ക് അല്ലല്ലോ, ഇത് പുറത്തൊരു സർവീസ് ആണ്. AWSന്റെ സർവീസ് ആണത്. AWS ഓൾറെഡി ഒരു ബാക്ക് ബോൺ നെറ്റ്വർക്ക്. See, AWS already will have a backbone network from this endpoint and this S3 bucket. So we don't need to bother about that. Okay, we only need to create the endpoint. When you're creating the endpoint, AWS will establish one connection between this endpoint and this S3 bucket. Okay, we only need to go to the route table, then add a route. Like you can add any route, like for example VPC peering, whatever the route you have, so that you can add a route over here and it will be redirect over this endpoint. I'll show you how we can do. First, let me go to one region. So here I will select Ohio region. Okay. So I'll go to VPC. And then I'll create a VPC. Okay, then I'll create private and public subnet. So go to VPC. So this is my gateway endpoint. CAD range I will give 10.0.0.0/24. Then create a VPC. Then I'll create two subnets, public and private subnet. Go to subnet, select your VPC, gateway endpoint VPC. Subnet name 1, public subnet. So I'm going to create 2A, availables on 2A I will create. Range is 10.0.0.0/25. I'll create one more subnet as a private. Available zone I will give 2A. CADR block 10.0.0.128/25. So now I created two subnet, one is a private and one is a public. I'll go to route table, and here you can see that one main route table already created, and this route table I will consider as my public route table. Okay, so this I will call it as pub route table. I'll create one more route table for private subnet, private RT. Select your VPC gateway endpoint, then create your route table. So now I created two route table. One is a public route table, another one is a private route table. Let me just rename it as private route table. So I'll go to internet gateway, then I will create an internet gateway. So create IGW endpoint. Then I will attach with my gateway endpoint VPC. For that, select the VPC, then select gateway endpoint. Attach to internet gateway. So go to route table. Select your public route table, go to subnet association, edit subnet association, add your public subnet. Select your public route table again, go to route, edit route, add a route 000, then select your internet gateway. Same step I will repeat for private as well. I'll go to my private route table, I'll go to subnet association, edit subnet association, select your private route table, then save association. Then select your private route table again, then route, edit route, and you can see that we have only one route, 10.0.0/24. Right. So now I will create two virtual machine on public subnet and private subnet. Then I'll try to connect that virtual machine. Then I will check whether I'm able to connect internet or not. Okay. So for that, I'll go to EC2 console. I'll go to the particular region. Which region? Ohio region. If anybody have any doubt, let me know. Okay. Like endpoint is a very important topic in VPC. Endpoint peering and all. So let me create a instance, launch instance. So this is my public virtual machine. I will call it as public VM. Instance type t2.micro. Key pair I will select. I will create a new key pair. This is Ohio key. Create a key pair. Okay, this Ohio key I will use. I will change my network to gateway endpoint. So click on edit. Select gateway endpoint. Select your public subnet first. Select IP assigned public enable. And you can create a security group as well. I will create a group with all traffic. Type I will select all traffic to get rid of errors. Then we can create an instance, launch instance. Okay, one instance has been created. I'll create one more instance, launch instance. So this is my private virtual machine. I will call it as PVT VM. Select your instance type. Key pair name I will select Ohio key. Network I will change to gateway endpoint. Then I will select private. I do not require any public IP address. I will keep it as disabled. Then I will select my existing security group as all. Then launch instance. So go to instance tab. So now you can see that public VM successfully created. So I will select this public virtual machine. Then I will connect through this console. Connect. So now you can see that I successfully connected my virtual machine. So now I will try to connect my S3 bucket. What is the command to connect your S3 bucket? How to list all your buckets? Okay, AWS S3 LS. So you can see that unable to find credential, right? So we have to create a role, then we have to attach with our virtual machine. I'll do the same. I'll go to my virtual machine, go to instance. Hello? Yes. Okay. Okay. 20th for 1 minute. Okay, 2 to 2:30, right? Okay, except this actually, what are the slots you have? Then do one thing, like you can mention 3:30 to 4:30. I'll be available at that time. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I will attach a role. I'll go to my public virtual machine. I'll go to action. Okay, how to attach a role? Action. Then go to security. Modify IAM role. Then we have to select the role. Okay. Yesterday itself I created role, right? And you can see the role name. Where is the role? S3 full access EC2. And IAM is a global service. So that's what we need to create a role for a specific region. Okay, so once you create a role, and that role you can access from any region, regardless of any region. I will select S3 full access, then update IAM role. Successfully updated, I'll go to my virtual machine again. I will execute this command. And you can see that I'm able to access my test bucket January. Right? I'm able to access my bucket, right? Okay. I'll go to my second virtual machine now. For that, let me connect my second virtual machine. So this is my second virtual machine. I don't have any public IP address. How to connect this virtual machine? Bastion host, which means like, see, first we have to create our key file over here, right? What is the key actually we created? We have to copy and paste the key over here. From this server, I can connect my private virtual machine. Okay, so I'll do the same. I'll get the key first. Let me go to download. So this is my key. Let's copy this key. Then go to your public virtual machine. Then we have to create a key. See, if I execute ls command, you can see that we don't have any files over here. I'll go to nano, then I'll create a key. Paste, Control O, enter, Control X. Okay, next. What I should do? SSH. See, we should reduce the permission first, right? Okay, so ch mode. So why should I reduce the permission? Only the owner or the who's created that file, only he should access my server. Okay, except him, nobody should access. That's what. So ls minus l. Now you can see the permission only for the root. The root only created this file, and he only can access this file, right? Okay. So now ssh minus I or tag I. Then we can specify the username of your private server. What is the username? EC2 minus user @ and then I'll specify the private IP address. So this is my private IP address 210. Okay, then paste over here. Okay, and you can see that now I connected 10.0011. This is my public server, right? See, if I select my public server, you can see that 10.0011. If I select my private server, 10.00219. I'll hit enter. Okay, wait. I didn't specify the key name. Enter. I will acknowledge it. So now I connected my private server. The IP address over here, 210, right? Successfully connected my private server. Okay. So here also I will try to execute AWS S3 ls. Unable to locate credential, right? I'll go to my private virtual machine. Then I will add the role. See, I'll go to security. As of now, my virtual machine doesn't have any role, right? Permission. So go to action. So go to security, modify IAM role, then select your S3 full access role, then update IAM role. Fine. I'll go to virtual machine again. Now I will execute this command. See, we're not able to access our S3 bucket now. Why? So as we discussed, so now it got stuck in between. See, the request actually routed to route table, but from route table, actually that packet doesn't know actually where it has to go. Okay. So now we will create a endpoint in our VPC. Then I will create a route from my route table to endpoint. Okay. So let me do the same. I'll show you once again. See, not able to access this. Right? Any doubt? No. I'll go to my Ohio region VPC. This is Northern Virginia. I'll go to my Ohio region first. I'll go to endpoint, and in left side you can see that we have an option endpoint, right? Select endpoint, and we don't have any endpoint as of now. I will create an endpoint. Let's click on create endpoint, and just call it as gateway endpoint. Gateway endpoint. So then select AWS services. We have a 4 option. One is a private link ready partner services. Another one is AWS marketplace. Then other endpoint services. We'll discuss later what it all. So first we will select AWS services because I need to create a connection between my 2 services, right? One is EC2, another one is S3. So then come down. Then here you can see that type interface, right? So as we discussed, the gateway endpoint only support 2 services, which all are DynamoDB and S3 bucket. So I will search for S3, and then I will select this one. Okay, or else I will just hit enter. You can see that S3 that is supporting gateway interface. So here I will select gateway endpoint as of now. Okay, so then we have to select VPC. What is the VPC name? Gateway endpoint VPC. Okay, and you have to select a route table as well. See, here we no need to select any subnets, right? Only we have to select what? VPC, but we have to select one route table. Okay, we no need to create any route. Automatically they will create a route over there. Okay, that's what. So where I should create a route? Private to public? Private route table only. So I will select private route table. Then I will click on save. Okay, create endpoint. So now I successfully created, and I think it's a pending state. Okay, it's available now. Okay, I'll go to my virtual machine. Then I will execute this command once again. AWS S3 ls. I'm not able to access. Why? Okay, let me try. What is the region name? What is the region? Ohio. What is the region code? US East. Let me try with the region code. So now we are able to access our S3 bucket by using private virtual machine. See, you have to specify the region. Why? Because actually we created this endpoint specifically one region, right? That's what. Okay, but if you have an internet connection, you don't need to specify because your server having internet connection. Automatically that will connect through internet. Okay, but this endpoint I created specifically in a particular region, Ohio region. So you have to specify minus region, then what is the region? Okay, now I successfully connected my virtual machine by using private IP address or private virtual machine. Any doubt? No. Any doubt?